So welcome back to another episode of Chamber Talk, the podcast where we break down the policies and legislation that impact businesses and communities right here in Orange County. I'm Andrew Gregson, CEO of North Orange County Chamber of Commerce, and today we are honoured by having Senator Tom Umberg with us from, obviously, who represents the 34th District.
Right.
Thank you, sir, for coming on today. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thanks, Andrew.
And there are some things that come across that really don't get very much media attention, and it really means more to everybody who's listening and in our community. I wanted to ask you a few questions about that today, if that's all right. So the first one is, I thought we'd set off with, recently you introduced a Senate Bill 448 that addresses an issue regarding trespassing and unlawful properties and things like that.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what made you first think about that, how you came to it, and what it really means to us all?
Sure. Well, here's the issue. And when I look at legislation, one of the things I ask is, what is the good we're basically promoting, or what is the harm that we're trying to reduce? And in this case, there's both good and harm. The harm is when there's a vacant building, a house, whatever it may be, and folks move in. They have no right to be there. It's not a tenant who's held over. It's simply someone who moves into vacant property, and they stay, and sometimes they do harm to the property. But it's very difficult to have them move out. So if you're the rightful, lawful property owner and you want to lease it or you want to sell it, you can't do it because there's folks that are occupying it that have no right to be there. And so what this does is this basically expedites the process. You don't go through an unlawful detainer action, which is what you do if you got a tenant who is, you're evicting a tenant. This is someone who's a trespasser, has no right to be there. And the other part of it, that's the harm. And the good is that you want to have housing especially available. We've got a tremendous housing shortage. And so you don't want housing tied up by people who don't belong there. Now, they're homeless. There are other places for homeless folks. There's shelters, transitional shelters. There's all sorts of other ways housing that people can be sheltered. But simply squatting in someone's home is not the way to do it.
Now, in my own personal experience, does that sort of waver along, squatters' rights type of thing, and those evictions? Because those evictions, as you say, can take a very long time, and it's costly to the person who owns the property.
It takes a long time, and it's costly, and it takes the property off the market for a long period of time.
And they damage it usuly in the process, don't they?
That's right. And so that's the purpose behind the bill. I think that, and you had asked about squatters' rights. And that term is used, I think, for folks who adversely possess property. If you actually openly and notoriously possess property for a period of a number of years, then the ancient law says you become the owner of that property.
Nine-tenths the law, isn't it?
Right, that's right. But that's over an extended period, 5 years, 10 years, that kind of thing. This is really folks who are sort of temporarily
just deciding to occupy something. Right. Well, that makes sense. Well, thank you for doing that. That's cool. That's awesome. That's a thing that a lot of people talk about, to be honest, especially right now. And even so, now we even have these open restaurants now, don't they? They've been there for quite a while, and nobody's really occupying those as they're being renovated or whatever. And that happens too.
Right.
Which is part of the problem. Right. So another thing that when I was reading through your website and obviously all the bills, and you've been very busy, so I'm going to spout off the bill number, but I'm not expecting you to remember it because I wouldn't remember those either. So another one is Senate Bill 398, which prohibits lotteries or prize-based incentives for voter registration, which is something that we don't generally think of ourselves, but obviously it meant something to you and why you were pushing that forward.
So, sure. In the 2024 election, there was an issue, not in California, but other places, about basically creating a lottery. Someone could win $1 million if they registered to vote. They had to be of a certain type. And it was my view that the election process is unique to the United States, or at least unique in terms of the way, our both the process and the electoral college and that kind of thing are all very, very unique. And
it's our own, isn't it?
It is our own, and we and it is my view that you got to want to register to vote. You got to want to participate in your community. Same thing with voting. You should do it, but you should do it for the right reasons. And it's not to win $1 million. It's because you care about your community. And so, providing incentives to register to vote and providing incentives, monetary incentives to actually vote, or giving somebody something of value, in exchange for them voting, is illegal in California, and this is just another aspect of that. It's an issue that has arisen in other places, and I'm hoping it doesn't arise here in California, and it just prevents it.
Well, to be fair, I've been, as we were talking offline before, but I was discussing some of that testing that I do. One of the questions is, what is your responsibility as a citizen of the United States of America? And one of them is to go and vote.
That's right. You've got very few responsibilities.
Very few, yes.
Right. By the way, Andrew, big things in store for Andrew. Andrew's going to become a citizen of the United States. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. And I really appreciate it when people who come to the United States, they value, you don't have to become a citizen. You can stay here as long as you're legally a resident. You don't have to become a citizen. But folks that take the extra step because they want to vote, because they want to participate, because they feel an obligation to give back, they go through the rigors of becoming a citizen, and you did that. So thank you very much. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm happy to hear that you're going to become a citizen here very, very soon.
Well, it's been really part of this job has made me really realize how important it is. Getting the opportunity to learn about how all our political figures, how they interact with the community, and how what we see, what we believe, what's seen is heard and also transpired back. So really, it's a big thing to all you guys.
One of the things that concerns me is that the lack of understanding of the importance of the checks and balances that we have between the three co-equal branches of government. And it was designed that way by our founders a couple hundred years ago, so that not one branch becomes too powerful. Mm-hmm. That's what they were worried about. Mm-hmm. They were worried about your kin from the UK, from the United Kingdom, having a king, an authoritarian source of all sort of power. And once we break down those checks and balances, once for example, the Congress doesn't do its job as a check on the president, on the executive branch, or the judges, the judiciary is not recognized as the branch that actually is the final arbiter of the law, that I know this sounds a bit hyperbolic, but we devolve into an authoritarian society. And I am concerned that, in particular, young people don't understand the value of these co-equal branches of government that are unique to the United States. That's unique to the United States, and we have prospered, not just politically, but economically, because we have the rule of law here. And once people don't have to follow the law, once the rule of law becomes just whatever edict is issued by whomever happens to be president, that's what happens to other countries, and the economy implodes. And so it's of great importance for all of us, and particularly for our children and grandchildren, that folks understand the importance of those checks and balances.
I think you've got an amazing point there. And I also feel or see that a lot of it is being lost, isn't it? So you mentioned there about checks and balances, the rules that really we're supposed to abide by or look at, of the forefathers of the country, way ahead of the time, thought of something that's more intelligent than anybody else has really figured out between now and then. And I feel that it's not just a younger generation that's missing this. The less that people discuss it, the less that it's actually mentioned or explained, it just gets lost. I mean, because there's so much information that's feeding through us every day that the real stuff just gets lost. And I know that obviously you're a big part of the judicial system. Somebody who really understands it, what other things could we do as citizens understand more about how these systems should be in place rather than having to rely on fact finding somewhere, you know?
Well, I mean, it all starts in civics education when you're in grade school. But I think that whatever information you learn in grade school needs to be reinforced. And the practical reality of reinforcing it is so important. It's just not this sort of academic exercise. So I'm a lawyer by profession, and the judiciary has historically been independent here in the United States, and that's served us very well. I've disagreed with judicial decisions, but once the judge and the Supreme Court have made a decision, that's the law of the land, and you have to obey it. And if one branch of the government, the Congress, just simply says, we're not going to obey it anymore, then things collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'll just use an example from the 1950s, a case called Brown versus Board of Education. The Supreme Court said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say you can't have segregated schools anymore, that segregation is illegal in the United States. And several states said, we're not going to abide by it. And the executive then said, look, I may not agree with that decision, but that's the decision of the Supreme Court, and we are bound by the rule of law to follow what the Supreme Court says, so I'm going to enforce that. As the executive, I'm going to enforce the law. And that's really the executive's responsibility is to enforce the law.
Right.
If at that point in time, the executive said, well, okay, fine. Supreme Court said it. Too bad. You guys do whatever you want to do, whatever state you want to do it in. Then we no longer have the rule of law. And it is because we have the rule of law. So, for example, one of the reasons our economy is strong here in the United States as compared to other countries is because if there's a dispute between two either individuals or businesses, you can go to court and you can get an independent decision from a court that's not influenced by corruption. But once the courts become corrupt, and I've spent a lot of time working in this space in South America and Afghanistan and places like that. Once the courts become corrupt, people don't want to invest because they have no recourse if you don't perform in accordance with whatever contract you may have.
No checks and balances.
There's no checks and balances. So it is critically important that our judiciary stay independent. It's critically important that we maintain the rule of law. And it's critically important that everyone understand why that underpins our economy, why that underpins our way of life, our quality of life. So
another thing that I'd noticed, obviously the last administration, President Biden, there was an AI
Yes.
regulation, and of course, California, we're a big part of the tech industry, and I know that's a big thing for you. You mind sharing a little bit about what
Sure.
you're working on regarding that?
Artificial intelligence is probably the technology that is, in my lifetime, most transformative.
Right.
More so than the internet, more so than even personal computers. And artificial intelligence, I think everyone's heard of it. A lot of folks don't understand exactly what that is, but artificial intelligence actually is a model that is designed to work like a human brain.
Mm-hmm.
So you get input and you analyze that input and you then get output. So you can ask, one of these large language models, whatever it is, ChatGPT,
right.
or one of the other models, and you can give that model certain information, and they'll spit out an essay, they'll spit out a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and that's good, and you can give input, and you can find cures for diseases that we've never been able to cure before. You can create medicines. You can create all sorts of efficiencies. But you also can create some real hazards. I mean, you can create a weapon that a biological weapon. You can create even a nuclear weapon if you have if you get the know-how, if you have the resources, you can do that. And so we need to make sure that we basically harvest the good and protect everyone against the bad in terms of artificial intelligence. And that's a very tricky thing. As to how we can make sure that artificial intelligence benefits us benefits us in terms of what they produce. Here in California, we do have a large artificial intelligence economy, particularly in the Bay Area, and we want to protect that. You're right that the current administration in Washington has basically said, have at it, everyone. That there's not going to be rules. I don't agree with that. The European Union has developed rules and ways of enforcing those rules, and I chair the Judiciary Committee where all that legislation comes, and I'm trying to make sure that we in California are aligned internationally, so that whatever standards are adopted here in California are consistent with international standards. So that means that the way we define artificial intelligence, the way we protect against certain harms, whether we require the models to, for example, to be tested, either, you can self-certify, or you can have a governmental entity sort of certify whether or not this model lends itself to
the good or not, basically,
to ultimately providing something that could be very harmful. Now,
that's not an easy job, because, that's like controlling the internet, isn't it? So is the thought process of this is if, because I'm assuming it would be a company who's bringing it forward. If a company were to bring a new AI idea forward, the idea of this is they would have to openly showcase this to this committee first, so the committee could look at it, ask questions, do whatever. Because in the long run, it might look fine, fluffy and beautiful right now, but maybe it's collecting data that it shouldn't be giving somewhere else. Is that part of what you're meaning, or is that something else?
No, that's exactly the point, Andrew. That's exactly the point. The point is that while we wouldn't do it, but we would empower,
people
other entities, the Attorney General or another separate agency. Is that I'll just give you an example of healthcare insurance and bias in healthcare insurance. So if you have an artificial intelligence model that makes decisions as to the kinds of healthcare you should get, that model is trained. In other words, that model is fed information, and that information, depending upon where it comes from, could have a really horrible outcome for an individual. So, for example, it could say, "Hey, listen, you know what? You're too old. We're not gonna spend money on you. We're not gonna spend money on you because you're too old, or because you may have a pre-existing proclivity to a certain disease, or you may have something that's just too expensive to deal with." And so we want those models to be transparent, so we know what the biases are that exist. In hiring, we don't mind if a model has a bias towards intelligence. We want to hire intelligent people. What we do mind is if the model has a bias, for example, against protected classes, against women. There's a sort of a famous example of where a model was created to figure out who a large company should hire as engineers, and basically it was trained. It was fed information about who was successful as engineers. Well, it comes out that they should only hire sort of, white males. Well, the reason that solution was derived is because for the vast majority of the time that engineers were, doing their engineering, it was white males. That's right. Yeah. So, anyway, another long-winded answer, but this is a complicated subject.
Well, it is a complicated subject. And the thing is AI is so prevalent in our lives right now. It is everywhere. It's in your cars. I mean, it's been around for a long time. It's just like you said, advanced to a whole different extreme. It's started with little traffic lights. When it sequences, that's sort of like an AI, isn't it? So, I mean, it's rare everywhere, and we talk about it, and everybody's saying, "Oh yeah, it's great. But which is, however, we do have to be protected from these things as well, just like the internet, the black web, and things like the dark web. Sorry, all things like this. It's all part of it. So
most people don't know that when you're driving your car, that the manufacturer, if you got a new car, the manufacturer is collecting all that information,
100%,
and may use that information, may sell that information to insurance companies. And it's important that we allow for research, but it's also important that we protect our own privacy. So if, for example, where I travel, if that's used to figure out, models for safe driving, that's one thing. If
Right.
that's used to, for example, figure out, how often I go to the grocery store, that's not so good.
No.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I think it's part of my military background, but when I'm driving my electric car, I do wonder now and again is imagine a quick terrorist attack. You could just close down everybody. You'd log in and you could close all these cars down. So if we were all electric and we weren't protected, we'd come to a standstill very, very quickly. So that does cross my mind too.
No, Andrew, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a reality. Sure.
And that's why you're looking into. That's why we have these governing parties doing that.
Right. You could potentially shut down air traffic. Right.
Imagine how crazy that is. And,
that's right.
And that's why we really do have to pay attention and not just go with all the fluffy, beautiful stuff. We've got to be careful.
And that's the issue with, for example, TikTok being owned by a Chinese entity.
Right.
Is that, if everybody who's using TikTok, if everything in their phone basically is now accessible to a foreign entity, that's very dangerous.
It can be. It really can. And even if they were a friendly country, you still don't know what it's like. People we get on today, we might not get on tomorrow, and it's the same with countries or anyone else, right? So we just have to be a little bit more cautious about that. I think.
Even you're right. Even if it's used for a non-nefarious purpose. So, just for advertising. Do I want all this advertising?
Exactly.
No, I want all that advertising.
Look how many text messages we get these days. It's just rubbish.
Right.
Now, you touched on something there a little bit, and I'd love to be able to pull that up because it's a big deal right now, is insurance in California.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're looking for car insurance, some companies won't insure you right now if you're in California, or they want all the money up front. I just had to go through that. We had to pay, I think, $3,800 up front for our insurance, which is very hard just to quick do that. It's an American problem maybe, or is it California? I don't know. But what does the Senate look at it?
No, this is Andrew, a very important problem, very important issue, and a very complex issue. People in California now aren't able to get adequate homeowners insurance.
Yeah.
And that's not just because of the fires in Los Angeles. It's a longstanding issue. And we in 1996 passed an initiative in California that empowered the insurance commissioner to regulate rates and regulate the operations in some ways of insurance carriers. And so, believe it or not, at least our homeowners insurance costs less than other places in the country based on property values and that kind of thing. Insurance carriers are saying, hey, look, we're not, if you don't let our rates float, we're not going to insure. Insurance companies are in the business of making money.
Sure.
That's what they do. And no problem with that. And they say, look, you got to let our rates float. And the regulators are saying, okay, some profit is certainly fine, but in essence, greed is not going to be countenanced. I don't know where you draw the line, but clearly, in my view, the market, we need to let the market work to some degree, because to the extent that insurance carriers are pulling out of the state and individuals are only left with the fair plan is not adequate for many homeowners. That's a problem. So we need to adjust it so that market forces have, in my view, a greater impact on how we regulate insurance.
Now, on that point, it's a lot of it might not be actual physical pressure, but it's sort of pressure on an individual. So as a senator, how do you make sure that you might not be enforcing something that's over-regulating or even under-regulating for that matter?
Yeah, that's a question that we deal with on a daily basis. So if you create too many regulations, you basically, housing construction is a good example. If you create too many hurdles, too many regulations, you inhibit the market to such a degree that either it becomes so expensive that it's unaffordable for most folks, or people just don't build here. Because, I'd rather build in Nevada. I'd rather build somewhere else. So trying to thread that needle as to what is reasonable and protects our communities versus what just becomes an obstacle, or just a revenue generator. So, for example, if someone's going to build in your neighborhood, you want your city council to say, wait a minute, you can't build an 8-story structure next to my 2-story house.
Right.
I don't want you to be able to build an 8-story. So I want the city council to say, no, you can't build an 8-story structure. That's an obvious example.
Sure.
But it's not an obvious example where someone says, all I want to do is I want to add another, 800 square feet to my house, and it takes 3 years to get through city council permitting. Then we've overregulated. And so I think we're doing an assessment right now. One of the outcomes of the fires in LA is, what do we really need? What do we need in terms of CEQA? CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. It's well intentioned. It's to say, look at, when you're proposing a project, you've got to figure out what the impact is on your neighbors, what the impact is on traffic, what the impact is on the community. That's a good idea. When it becomes so oppressive that you no longer can build anything, then it needs to be scaled back. And I think we're doing a reevaluation of all that right now.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of that going on, I think. I only watched on the news yesterday in Santa Monica, they were talking about on the front where all the water line is, a lot of those homes were built 50s and 60s, so they have their own septic tanks and everything. Well, we don't even allow that anymore, so they're not going to be able to just do that system anymore. And then, of course, they have to get rid of that so it doesn't wash into the sea. Like there's a
right, and you don't want septic tanks washing into the sea.
Not really.
But you also, by the sort of the flip side of that coin, is you also don't want to hamstring those property owners so that they basically can't do anything forever.
And it's gone. It's just land to look at.
Right.
Yeah, no,
but they have to be able to adjust so that you have whatever, you connect to the source system or something like that. But if you make it so onerous and so oppressive that it becomes impossible or impractical to do, then you've taken that housing off the market. You've harmed those homeowners. And so striking that balance between not having a septic tank sort of openly floating around on the beach, and making sure that people have an alternative, which is a connected source system, is that's our job. And it's hard. It's hard to figure out where you draw the line. And different people draw that line different places.
That's true. That's very true. I know that you did a few things regarding, if folks were involved with the January 6th attack, that they shouldn't be able to join the National Guard, which, to be honest, I think that makes sense.
The bill that actually was introduced last year is now signed into law, simply says, look, if you belong to an organization that is actively advocating and organizing to overthrow either the state government or the federal government, is that you shouldn't be in our National Guard. You shouldn't, we the taxpayers shouldn't be training you. Andrew, you know this, you were in the military, shouldn't be training you to be able to use lethal force so that you can more effectively overthrow your government. And so the law simply says that if you are a member of a group that is actively advocating and organizing to do those things, you can't be in the National Guard. Right. And it's very simple. So, for example, if you were part of, and it works on the right or the left, if you're part of Antifa, and you're advocating the overthrow of the state or federal government, you shouldn't be in the National Guard. We shouldn't teach you how to use an M4. We shouldn't teach you how to basically use a mortar. And on the right, if you're a member of, for example, the Proud Boys, who advocates the overthrow of the government, or is involved in insurrection, then we shouldn't train you to, again, be able to do that more effectively.
Now, not being in the American military myself, I wouldn't know the answer to this question, but I do know back home when I was joining the Army, they did actually do checks right through into great-great-grandparents of an individual. Is that something they actually document here in America?
No.
So then this is why things like this have to happen now, because they don't do those checks themselves, because that's what used to happen back then.
There's no check. I mean, to get a security clearance, then depending upon the level of security clearance, that they will do an investigation as to, your background and in some circumstances, your family's background also.
So really, you get more background if you're going through becoming legally able to stay here in America than you actually do if you join the military.
That's absolutely true.
Oh, that maybe that should be changed maybe a little bit. That would be a good idea. Okay, all right, that's good. So I remember last time we came when you were on our show, it was very different. Then we're on a tiny table. We'd only just moved in. But one of the big things that we discussed, which was a big part of what you were trying to do, is you were talking about fentanyl. You were talking about there was a story that it started from this lady and what had happened to her. And I think it's Prop 36. Yes. Would you like to elaborate and tell us more what's going on with all that now?
Yes. I mean, my background is in public safety and law enforcement as a federal prosecutor. And so those issues are near and dear to my heart. And I like to think I have some experience and expertise in that area as well. So last time I was on, I was talking about a bill called Alexandra's Law. And that was a very, very simple bill that said if you distributed fentanyl, whether you knew it or not. So for example, if you were distributing Percocet, it was laced with fentanyl, and you were arrested and convicted, the judge would tell you, hey, Umberg, you sold fentanyl. You may not have known you sold fentanyl, but you did it. If you do it again and someone dies, then you could be charged with a homicide. Right. It's exactly the same thing that happens with a drunk driving conviction. So, for example, if you're convicted of drunk driving, judge says to you, hey, you were driving a car while you were drunk, while you were under the influence of alcohol. And that's very, very dangerous. And if you do that again, I'm telling you right now, if you do that again and you kill somebody, you could be charged with a homicide. It's the same sort of thing. And it's the same logic as well. Well, that law never became law. That bill never became law. Very frustrating. So that part of that law, Alexandra's Law, was incorporated into Proposition 36. So that's now the law. It passed overwhelmingly in November. I think Proposition 36 is a good thing. It also says, look, if you're convicted twice of possession of certain narcotics, the third time you're arrested, it's now a felony, but you can go to treatment. And if you go to treatment, and you complete treatment successfully, you have no conviction. Your slate is wiped clean. You go on with your life. And I'm a firm believer in the treatment courts, that kind of thing, that folks who have substance abuse disorder need to be treated. So that's part of that bill as well. And then also for retail theft, the other part of the bill is retail theft. Mm-hmm. We've got a issue in California with retail theft, and the previous law basically allowed you to steal up to $950 a day, and it would remain a misdemeanor. Now, if you collectively steal over $950, that becomes a felony.
Right. So it's tallied up, basically.
Yes, exactly right.
That makes sense.
Right. Exactly right.
Talking about that, obviously, you're right. There has been a bit of an increase to people stealing from stores. Even we see it on TV a lot.
Right.
Is there anything else that's happening or changing to deter or try and stop?
Well, I think Prop 36, and we're in Orange County, and I know the district attorney
totally different,
Todd Spitzer is vigorously enforcing Proposition 36. So I think that does. I think we've seen crime, in fact, decrease. Mm-hmm. I think that my view is that the most important way to deter crime is, preventative, with education and making sure people have opportunity, making sure people know and understand, that there are opportunities available to them, and we resource those opportunities so that they're not in an environment where they feel they need to commit crimes to sustain themselves. Number one, with drug abuse, that we do the best we can to prevent folks from engaging in addictive behaviors with drugs. But if they do, that we treat them. I think that I think that both in law enforcement and in the legislature, folks are recognizing, understanding that. But when you commit a crime, or when you first start to engage in illegal drug use, we need to take action. We can't just turn away. We can't just, if it's a shoplift, we can't just say, oh, okay, it's only $300, so we're not going to do anything. If you're using heroin, we can't just turn away and just say, hey, listen, who cares?
Right.
We have to intervene earlier on, and in a way that is more profound, with both penalty, carrots and sticks.
Well, it has such a knock-on effect, though, doesn't it? Look at San Francisco, for example. A lot of corporations have sort of moved away because of the troubles they were having, and that does have a huge impact on our economy. And then the residents who live there. I mean, it's such a knock-on effect, and it starts from one area, doesn't it?
Sure.
So,
sure. And it's true in Orange County too.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right.
100%. I mean, it's the same everywhere. It's the same problem.
Exactly right.
So,
and then that increases the homeless folks.
Yeah.
And that also is an impediment to both the quality of life, obviously, of the homeless person, but also those who are around that area.
It just keeps knocking on. So it's such a huge impact. So thank you for fighting so hard on that one. Appreciate it. So it sort of ties in when you're talking about fentanyl. We're not going to go on to all the, federal stuff with the border control, but it sort of leaks into the border because obviously that's where these things happen. We had Radiant Futures on a couple of weeks ago because they were talking about, people being sort of like swapped into sort of slavery in a way. And they were, they're all, whether it was internal or external from incoming the border. What sort of things are we able to increase, or what's going on with that control of over checking that drugs and things like that aren't coming over into the country?
So,
and homegrown, should I say, as well, because they cook it at home too, right?
No, that's right. Methamphetamine is made right here in our neighborhoods. Yes, the most effective way to deal with supply issues, in other words, drugs coming into our country or drugs being manufactured here, is through intel. Physical barriers, they may have some purpose, but using intelligence, whether it's human intelligence, human sources to let law enforcement know where things are being done, made, where chemicals are coming from, electronic intelligence, you can detect all sorts of things electronically, and then to the extent it is on foreign soil, is having our foreign partners cooperate in addressing that, eradicating it. And also, so there's human intelligence, there's electronic intelligence, there's also signal intelligence, where you're picking up communications among folks. And those are the most effective ways. Those are really the most effective ways of addressing the supply issue. Supply issue is only exists because of the demand issue. That the only reason that there's a market for fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, whatever in the United States is because people are using.
Yeah, right.
And so, I mean, it's a chicken and egg thing. If we reduce demand here in the United States, then the supply will diminish in our neighbors' country, in our neighboring countries, and also here in the United States. And that would be a great benefit to places like Mexico. Mexican government doesn't want fentanyl labs. They don't want meth labs. They don't want cocaine production or transport. So
I can see why Prop 36 sort of plays a big role in that too, because, when you're saying we want to help people who are in this, trying to get them off, go through rehab and all the rest of it, sort of all ties in very well together, doesn't it?
We indeed. Drugs require prevention. They require treatment. They require consequences also. Yeah.
So we're at a point now, because I could talk to you forever. I think you're a fascinating individual. But I know you have a lot to do, and unfortunately I have to go back to work as well. But we got to the point where there could have been something we missed. If there's something important that you would like to share, or maybe have a little discussion about, and I just wanted to give you that time if there is something.
So, one of the things, in terms of where I'm working in public safety, I spend a lot of time and effort and energy on what we call collaborative courts, and those are alternative courts, whether it's for veterans or mentally ill or homeless or for drugs. And Orange County's done a very good job with what we call our collaborative courts.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I'm trying to do is trying to create standards throughout the state so that our collaborative courts around the state are employing best practices. And those are all long-term public safety issues and solutions.
And do those wrap into? I remember, I think it was the Orange County Supervisor Doug Chafee who had mentioned to me a long time ago. Is that to do with this? They were trying to look at when people come into court. A bit like your Prop 36, if you go through care and attention, go through help and what have you, eventually you might extinguish your record. Is that part
that's
of
exactly
this?
right.
Oh,
that's
okay,
exactly
okay.
right. So let's just take shoplifting as an example.
As an example, okay.
So you get arrested for shoplifting,
right?
And judge says, "Look, it looks like you've got a substance abuse problem. You've obviously got a problem, a criminal problem here. You've shoplifted, but if you follow this rigorous course of action, it needs to be rigorous. You do drug testing, you engage in drug treatment, you get your GED, or you work to make sure that you have a job. You do all those things, and we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to require you to demonstrate this once a month. We're going to require you to be drug tested. And you do that for a year. Then at the end of the year, if you've been drug-free and you've been crime-free and you're on the right direction, on the right trajectory, you're getting your education or you're getting a job, then you have no conviction and you can start over in life. One of the challenges is if you can't start over, then it's a continuing cycle. So if if you've got a conviction, you can't get a job.
What are you going to do?
That's exactly right.
That's amazing. So, that is a lot of commitment also, excuse me, for the individual.
It's a lot of commitment for the individual, and it's a lot of commitment for the judge and the support team that provides the infrastructure for the collaborative courts.
Well, there's a lot of collaboration there, because then you've also got other agencies that are helping all this other side, then finding jobs, then training maybe for different jobs. There's a huge amount of folks there.
Behavioral health folks, all those folks. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, that's amazing. That's
so
cool.
Congratulations again to Andrew. You're going to be a citizen here. I'm very proud of you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll see. You've got to pass the test. So there's a little written test, and I think there's a verbal test. I often joke.
Are you going to bring your daughter to the swearing in?
She's probably going to be at school. I don't want to get into trouble for not having her attending school, but that's part of that's part of being a responsible parent, right? But my wife said she's not going to go, but she is. She's just messing with me. But as I often joke with the city manager here in Buono Park, is I always say, well, when we're having a discussion, I'll say, yeah, but that's because you speak American. And I'll go, why do you always say that? We talk American. I said, because I speak English. But no, I might not be able to use that joke anymore.
That's exactly right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to hang out here with you.
So thank you again, Tom, for this riveting conversation. I could honestly be here all day, but I know we've got places to go. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Chamber Talk. Until next time, please stay inspired and connected. And for more interviews, visit chambertalk.podbean.com, or you can always head over to our YouTube channel, NOC Chamber, and be able to see these actually videoed. Thank you very much. See you again. Bye-bye.